Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. Lovely to have you with us for what I've now finally worked out is session 166. So that's how far along we are in this journey over the last few years. I was asked by someone the other day, and it took me all of about 3 or 4 minutes to actually work it out. But obviously, I just hadn't looked for months because ADHD, etc. It's wonderful. So delighted to have Craig with us today, who I'll make introductions to in just a moment. But thank you for everyone who's been able to join us now the weather's finally improving. And hopefully when we look back at some point, we can say that with a bit more joy as well. But yeah, to those who don't know me, to the roundtable before, a massive welcome. My name is Matt Baird. I've been running this now for best part of 4 years. Day to day, I work in recruitment. That's what keeps this whole thing running for free. So if you are looking for recruitment support, do please reach out. But I'm also co-chair of the board of Spring Housing in Birmingham, one of the founding members of the Supported Housing Network, and one of the founding chairs of the Supported Exempt Accommodation Forum. So lots of networking going on, and do let me know if you want to get involved more broadly in some of the other networking groups we're doing as well. But the Social Housing Roundtable is set up as a place to have really authentic discussions and really honest conversations about some of the big challenges we're having in the social housing sector at the moment. We've been incredibly broad with a lot of the conversations we've been discussing. We're delighted that we have everybody from chief execs, tenants, directors, consultants, housing officers, and everyone in between joining us on the roundtable. And I met Craig at an event last year. It was an AMIP conference, range of things to do with procurement and social value in the main. We're down at which is a little bit surreal for somewhere discussing social housing, but that's a whole different conversation. And I ran a session on recruitment, retention, and really, I guess, where the challenges are in that space. And Craig and I got talking around a lot of the work they've been doing from a procurement side, from a trades and labour support side, but also from an apprenticeship side. I said, look, you've got to come on, do a roundtable with us, and let's really kind of nail down within that procurement element what that wider offering looks like, and really what we should be expecting from our procurement partners as well, and where we should be holding people to account. So I'm delighted to welcome Craig Bell with us from Bell Group today. I'm going to pass over to you now, Craig, to, I guess, give your 15, 20 minutes overview of, I guess, the topic, the themes, your ideas, what you've learned, and then we'll move to more open discussion. But if anyone would like to put anything in the chat during that time, please do raise questions, raise thoughts, and I'll make sure they all got brought in that more open conversation. But Craig, thank you so much for joining, and I'll pass over to you.
Thanks for having me. Firstly, Matt, as you say, we had a very interesting conversation, really based around maybe frustrations is probably a good way of putting it. Frustrations around the sector, frustrations around some of the conversations that were ongoing. So I'll just briefly initially let you know who I am and what our business do, but more importantly, I'll talk about why we do it a little bit differently, and then maybe talk about some of my frustrations in the space, particularly in relation to the actual procurement side of things, and then maybe we could throw open for conversation at that point, if that's okay. So my business is don't just work in social housing. We work across various sectors, but predominantly in the government space. So we do a lot of work with defence. We do a lot of work with local authority, healthcare, and education, as well as social housing. Social housing makes up just over 50% of our turnover. And the services that we provide are the services lots of you will be familiar with. So we started off life as a cyclical contractor. We then moved on to providing planned maintenance programs and external refurbishment programs. We then moved on to delivering kitchen and bathroom programs. We then progressed that into fire safety, and I've continued on through the various elements that you deliver in social housing, to over the last 4 or 5 years pivoting a lot of the business to deliver decarbonisation as well. That's all what you'll hear from every other contractor, really, and that's really about where our similarities end, because the difference between our business and other tier 1 contractors in our space is that we self-deliver the work that we pull together. And by self-deliver, what I mean is we predominantly employ our own tradespeople. And by employ our own tradespeople, what I mean is we, as we say in our business, we grow our own, we develop our own people. We've currently got about 350, just under 350 apprentices in our business. And as of 2020, we also became an approved and accredited college. So we decided, having had apprentices for the 25, nearly 30 years that the company's been in existence, we decided 6 years ago that we wanted to provide a better standard of training. We wanted to create a higher bar. And by that, I don't necessarily mean the bar, the actual work that's been delivered. You know, if somebody's putting paint on a wall or fitting a kitchen or fitting a door, that to me is kind of secondary to the wider way that they go about the work, the people that they become. As we always say, we're trying to develop them as individuals and as good quality employees. It's not necessarily just about teaching them tasks, which I think is often a lot the case through standard apprenticeships. So really, Matt and I's conversation developed through these roundtable discussions that we were having, where there was various different approaches that people were taking, but there was a number of tier one contractors that had the view social value should no longer be scored as part of a procurement exercise. And they were talking about, they were quite impassioned in their discussion around the fact that they felt social value shouldn't be scored because it was impossible for contractors to really have any kind of lasting impact on communities, and that they felt it was more of a bolt-on and something that was done on the side rather than something that was integral to the business. I found this very frustrating. And to explain why, when our business was started back in 1988, my mum and dad started the business as a small contracting business. That very year, we became friends of our local hospice, and we also employed our first apprentice. So I grew up in a family that we sat around the kitchen table talking about apprentices, talking about the potential they had, talking about people that could develop through our business. And those apprentices and the people that we work with, the local charities, they were all fundamental to our service delivery. So when we would deliver contracts, what we would speak about at length was the opportunities that created for people, the opportunities it created for people in areas that there weren't a lot of opportunities always. So what we were trying to do as a business was make the most of our business or create opportunities in our business for our business using workforce that was predominantly in areas where there was large unemployment, there was the lack of opportunities, and there was a lack of desire by a lot of people to get into work. So we built a business that now employ nearly 3,000 tradespeople across the country. We've got 40 cost centres. As I say, we deliver about 65% of the work we do, we deliver with our own tradespeople. The reason we still subcontract work is because we don't always get that consistency of work to allow us to necessarily bring people in and develop people ourselves. So that's the element that we subcontract out. But really what I get frustrated with is people seeing training and development, recruitment and resourcing, and social value as three separate elements. And this is the big thing that Matt and I started talking about. To me, those three things are intrinsically linked. And what I would really like to see, now you could argue I would like to see it because it would benefit my business, but what I would really like to see from social housing providers when they're procuring contracts is much more of a commitment to local employment, local development of people, and upskilling and development of people as well. We're currently developing a new scheme that we're calling Zero to Hero. And the idea in the Zero to Hero idea is we want, and what we keep talking about is take a homeless person. And the reason we're taking a homeless person is because we're talking about somebody that's possibly at ground zero in terms of skill set and capability to get into work. So we're saying, let's take a homeless person and say, what would we need to do with that homeless person? What would we need to teach that individual to get them into work, to get them to firstly delivering a basic job? So we were looking at things like painting of fencing, for example. And we said, right, how long would it take us to get somebody who has never delivered any kind of trade type work to understand how to do the work safely, to a reasonable quality, but more importantly, to deliver the service in a way that would be a standard acceptable to our customers, i.e., being able to chap someone's door, have a conversation with them in the door, explain what they were doing, be trustworthy. So there's more than just the task, which is what I was talking about before. And what I would like to see is the social housing industry moving towards longer term contracts, which obviously we're already very good at, but through those longer term contracts, really pushing a lot of focus back on people like us and our competitors to say, well, okay, well, how many people are you going to actually employ on this contract? How many people are you going to develop? Because if all you're really going to do is go out to a supply chain and bring in a bunch of small contractors that don't have any commitment to apprenticeships, don't train people, and just, you know, are a group of 20 people that are really just trying to make a living for themselves, we're not really moving forward. And come the end of those 5-year contracts, 10-year contracts, 15-year contracts that you guys are signing up to, what have we actually done to try and develop that community where we're working? And this is where it becomes social value. So to me, the greatest amount of social value I can drive in communities is by creating jobs, training people, but not just any jobs, well paid, sustainable, long-term jobs and careers. And I think that our industry, I think that you guys can put a lot more pressure on people in my space for to do that and to deliver these contracts. As I say, it's easy for me to come here and say that because we do a lot of it. But when I do look at some of the sort of large PLCs in particular that work in the space, I think you're just trying to make money out of this industry. You're not actually helping anybody develop anything. And I think you guys got a big part to play in trying to put a bit of pressure on these organizations to try to move forward that way. So I don't know, Matt, does that give a decent overview?
Yeah, and I think, you know, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. It's why I kind of wanted you to come onto the roundtable, and that's not to say that I only want people on the roundtable who I agree with, but I think it's very much there was a need to have a conversation around who we're employing, why we're employing them, and as you say, what we're doing in that wider space to actually benefit communities. I know some businesses who are doing some incredible community work. I know others that have kind of lost that sense of community a bit and is trying to find ways to engage with their communities, but are using, as you say, national contractors who, you know, it's just we drive people around and they go to what they're actually doing to benefit local services. Morris, I know you just put a point in the chat there. Would you mind? Are you happy to jump on video and are you happy to come off mute? Yeah, please do, because it'd be great to hear from you. I know we've talked a little bit about procurement and things recently.
Morning, everyone. Morris, I'm procurement manager at London and Quadrant. My experience has come from working with a framework provider, Southeast Consortium. I fully hear everything that Craig was saying regarding social value, and I think a lot. Oh, I could hear feedback there.
That's all right. Come on, mute.
I feel that there could be a lot of work done in terms of internal communications with HAs, in terms of marrying up all departments. A lot of times there are departments who are going to be in silos and they just think, well, we only need to worry about this part. We'll let them deal with that part. Where I'm of the view of, do you know that there's a procurement need? Let's get everyone around the table at the offset that the minute you know that there's a procurement requirement. And if the social value team, I know a lot of HAs have social value teams or teams dedicated to coming up with the metrics and tracking social values, have the conversations. What schemes have we got in the local area? What have we got on our catchment area that we are trying to work towards? Is there other stakeholders in the business who may not know about this particular procurement we're doing, but are they aware, or is there anything they can bring to the table to help us then maybe structure better SV questions or better SV metrics, that when this tender goes out and it's in a specific area, it can actually have a direct impact in that specific area or for that specific scheme. Everyone does works around career advice. When it comes to career week, everyone is out at their local schools, everyone's out their local colleges talking about apprenticeships. There could be more work. Why isn't there more conversations? They could possibly be had, but there could be more conversations around, listen, we know that this potential college, they've got this amount of people who are coming up for their exams this year. Let's start getting into the community really, really early and start engaging with people for apprenticeships, and let's see what we can get done. Let's let them know that, oh, there's tenders going to be going on. We've got these SME contractors available. A lot more discussions should be happening and a lot more collaborative discussions should be happening. It shouldn't be in silos. It shouldn't be knee-jerk reactions. It should be, we know that there's a need. What do we need to be considering? Okay, if we're going to be considering social value, let's not just think, oh, we'll just throw the same questions that we've been throwing out from before. Let's actually actively get people involved. And yeah, some people might roll their eyes and think, oh, that's more to do. But if you want to do something right, and if you've got a commitment to doing something, you might as well just do it right in the offset. and set a precedent and get the mentality right, so people then just start getting used to it. And then what HA doesn't want to become like best practice or best known for doing something right. Everyone wants that sort of like recognition, right? So if people start doing that and just taking that little bit more time and care and just changing the narrative. Like if you're coming across stakeholders who are a bit stubborn, do what I would do and just find a way around them. Go to the person who's up above, or disregard them, and just to be like, okay, I hear everything that you're saying, but we're actually going to do it this way, and we've actually got the backing of this director, we've got the backing of this head of service. It's not hard. It is, but it's not. If that makes sense. I think it depends on how you are in that, your mental frame and thinking. Are you the sort of person who wants to challenge and bring about change, or the sort of person who will come across a hurdle, or someone who will say, no, we're not doing that, we don't want to get involved in that, and just shirk away?
Thank you, Morris. I mean, Craig, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think I actually 100% agree with you, Morris. But one of the again, one of the elements that come up when Matt and I were speaking previously was, what is social value? And I think it's such an important question for us to try to, or such an important element for us to try to understand before we try to create a social value plan. Because I've spoken to a couple of really, really large housing providers that have told me in the past that they don't actually have social value objectives. They just want to do more in the social value space. They don't have social value objectives, and they don't fully understand their housing or the demographic of the people that live in their houses. And what I said to all of those individuals, multiple people that have said that to me, and what I said to them was, well, what I would say is, if you don't understand what your social value objectives are, how can you expect us to do any kind of positive work in your communities? Because we can only help you achieve your objectives. We can't create objectives for you, because we're just a contractor. You know, we don't know who lives in your houses. We don't know what you're trying to achieve. But I think the big thing I always look at with social value, and the way we measure it in our business, social value is super important to our business. And what we've always said is, if you go back to a community a year later, you should be able to see that you've made an impact. Now, what I mean by that is, painting a fence doesn't create an impact. Now, we're asked regularly to do things like, oh, can you come and refurbish this community centre? I'll say, okay, yeah, we could do something like that. But what I would much rather do is send a few tradesmen, get our community engagement coordinators to go to the area, engage with the local residents, bring the residents to the community centre and help them to do it themselves. Because if you help them to do it themselves, what you're doing is you're creating a sense of community. You're giving them skills that they probably didn't have previously. So you're doing sort of almost a work experience type situation. And you're creating a sense of pride in that community. So when you then leave that community centre, the people have ownership of it. They can look back on it and say, I was part of that. I helped paint that fence. I helped paint that room. Rather than a bunch of tradesmen came along, painted the community centre. Nobody really used it for the next 12 months. So it's the difference between doing it the way I'm talking about versus the kind of generic social value way. It's about how you can actually make an impact, and really thinking about how to make an impact. But in order to do that, you have to understand what impact you want to make. Are we trying to get people into work? Are we trying to integrate people? Are we trying to maybe help people with disabilities? What are the key objectives? Because I can tell you, Morris, if you were to say to me, Craig, right, okay, you're going to come on board for the next 10 years with us doing whatever program, and you said, here are my key objectives. It's this, and this. I would come back to you with a super plan on how we can help you, how we can help you fix it. But if you come to me and say, Craig, I want you to commit 1% of the project spend to social value, on what would be my response? What is you want me to spend on?
Yeah. I'm of the same way. It's that asking the question, it's saying, well, what is it going to go towards? What do you actually want to do? And sometimes the questions might make people feel uncomfortable because they don't even know the answers themselves. But then it's a case of bringing it to the table and saying, if you don't know the answer, I've got some examples. Let me go away and mock up something to maybe give you an idea. And who's your directors? Who's your head of service? Let's get around the table. Opening up and having those sorts of questions could help. And you made a really good, valid point on, if there are HAs out there who they don't even know what their resident makeup is, or they don't even know what is in their catchment area. The question is then, well, how about we start going and doing that? Let's go get some engagement. Let's speak with comms. Let's speak with the resident engagement officers, or whoever is allocated to being on the floor, being out there, being active in the community. Let's come up with an initiative. Let's create something and let them know what our plan is and why we're doing it. Yeah, we're going to start knocking on your doors or putting pamphlets through or inviting you to come and paint the local community centre or help build something, etc. But the reason why we're doing this is because of, like, give people, because everyone wants answers. Everyone is always going to want, there's always a resident who's going to want to say, why are you doing that? But why are we? Be prepared to answer those questions. And if not, we're going to go away, we're going to find out, and we'll come back to you.
And there's a point made in the chat that, so Judith has said that as tenants, we are suffering from skill shortages and professionally well-trained operatives. There we are. That's right. So training skillful professionals and those able to interact effectively with people in their homes and communities is vital and not a nice extra. And I think this is something which is coming up more and more. Stella said that engagement is about empowerment. And then a little message sent privately, so I'm not going to kind of say who sent it, but saying last time I was on a procurement panel, the contractors I didn't want weren't local. The ones I did want weren't chosen because they wanted one contractor who could cover absolutely everything rather than looking actually what they could deliver. I didn't want them because their spin was just that, and we had them before. They said one thing, but never did any of their good-looking ideas, were the most expensive, and we wanted people local who knew the area. Locals know the area and live nearby. So what was the point of doing a procurement panel if they weren't going to listen to the panel in the first place? And Craig, I know this is something you and I have talked about before, which is that we've had tenants, we have people who engage in communities, you have people of various kind of ilk who actually are on the front line, for want of a better term, out in our communities every day saying this isn't working, and we've heard about these guys before and they're not going to deliver the value, but they either come in cheaper or they do whatever they need to do to win the contract. And there was something else that came up at the conference when we were there, was going, actually, how much of the social value work that people are saying they're going to deliver gets delivered? It isn't. It's the first bit that always seems to be being cut in order to save money on a contract.
The big thing that we need to ask, though, is why are we delivering social value? So, for example, if we were to say, we're going to make a project 1% of the project value, as I said before, I've heard this example used a number of times, 1% of the value of the project should be spent on social value. My argument would be, who's better placed to deliver a social value exercise, the social landlord or the contractor? I think it would be obvious that the social landlord would be better placed. If that is the case, why are they giving me 1% of the value for me to spend it? They may as well just keep taking a 1% discount and spending it themselves. The reason I think that a contractor can offer really positive social value and where it comes from is if we are in that community and we are working in that community, what can we help to do to leave a legacy in that community? We can straight away, we can offer jobs. So that's a big thing. We can offer career opportunities. We can offer well-paid, well-trained jobs. And that's the whole idea in having long-term contracts as well. So if you're just going to subcontract everything, you'd be as well just doing it every year and trying to drive the price down, because that's all you're getting. But the other big thing with social value, which is a really key part, I think, of any project delivery, is if you can develop a relationship with the people who are living in those homes, then the project usually will run a lot better. So if when we turn up to replace someone's kitchen, the people understand who we are as a business, and maybe their sister's daughter just got an apprenticeship with us, and they know what we're all about as a company and a contractor, and it's the same people that did their neighbour's house or maybe replaced their windows the previous year, and we start to build relationships with them and develop relationships with them, we can then offer a far greater quality of service. Now, that works for everybody, because it works for the resident living in the property. It obviously works for the social landlord because their house has been looked after better, but it also allows us to be far more productive. And if we can be more productive, that allows us to drive our cost base down as well. So it allows us to be a lot cheaper as a contractor. So it's one of those things, if social value can have a massive impact on the quality of project delivery, by having an impact on the quality of the project delivery, everybody benefits. All stakeholders benefit from it. What we're finding is social value where somebody's saying, oh, we've had a party in the local community centre where we made some cakes and passed around some flyers about who we are as a company. That's not social value. It's not social value, but it's where the problem comes from, is that lack of focused understanding at procurement stage and at mobilisation stage of the contract on what are the social value objectives we're trying to achieve here. One of them for me should always be, we're trying to create an integration between the contractor and the local community. We're trying to leave a legacy. That should be a fundamental part of it.
And you can see that Colin's put in the chat there that more needs to be done over a long time before thinking just about an apprenticeship for an opportunity. Is what is that long-term value? And just before bringing in Shonak there, Kate Willis said it's not just the immediate impact, so social value is about the long-term impact. We've recently housed a young lady who spent 11 years in hospital because there was no suitable accommodation. The social value there is not just that young lady. Her family have moved 2 streets away to be able to support her. And the value to the public purse is huge. It's about discussing these cases with the contractors that gives them an insight into the people they are supporting, and the contractors then can come up with ideas as well. Working in supported accommodation using tenants themselves, it not only gives them a sense of pride, but it also reduces tenant damage in the longer run. It's exactly what you're highlighting there, Craig. And as Tony has said, a director of a housing association I was working for was fired for taking backhanders on the situation we were just talking about. And that's unfortunately the side you've kind of got to get around. Before I bring you back in on Kate's point though, Craig, I'm going to bring in Shonak. Shonak, it's good to have you with us. Hopefully.
Yeah, sorry, just trying to find the right buttons. Yeah, I had a question for Craig. Hi, Craig. I'm from Live West Customer Engagement, and I mean we try and involve our customers in procurement of some contracts, but it's as probably Colin, who's on the call as well, will attest. It's a slow progress, and I think it's. A lot of it's quite tokenistic at the moment, but we're trying to move it forward. But so we're currently in the process of procuring a large contract for replacing windows and doors, and that may be one contract. We've got quite a big geography, so we come from Penzance right up to sort of Somerset and Gloucester, about 40,000 properties. It may be one contract, or it may be divided into some smaller ones because for obvious sort of reasons of geography. And tomorrow there's a sort of pre-tender market engagement event which I've been invited to. And so my question is really, what would you have some key questions that you'd be asking the potential contractors that attend that event around social value, in terms of how they would marry up their ideas about social value around creating that across a very sort of diverse geography and lots of different communities? Because we're obviously not talking about we have community investment workers, but they do very different things depending on where they're working and which communities they're working in, because they're such diverse communities. So yeah, it's really just about what kind of key things I should be asking people in the discussions if I get opportunity.
I know your housing stock well, as I'm sure, okay, I'm sure you know. But the big challenge you guys have is the rural element of your housing stock, and I think that's I think is a really key element. You can't behave the same way in Bristol as you're going to behave in Penzance. It's just fundamentally different. But I think if I was you, what I would want to understand is, do contractors understand the complexity of dealing with those different communities? And the big thing from a social value point of view is, do they understand the different challenges that are faced within your different communities? Because straight away, my understanding of your housing stock, the challenges you have is you have certain properties that still don't have heating or central heating systems in because of the rural nature of them. Those people can be very isolated, particularly the elderly residents, which I think you've got quite a lot of elderly residents. I'm correct?
Yeah, particularly down in the sort of Cornwall.
So you've got a really unique challenge there, that you have people that are in a rural environment that are stuck in old oil heating systems and things like that are extremely costly. And those people probably are quite isolated and probably increasingly isolated. Then when you go to some of the other areas, you've got Bristol has huge social problems, which those social problems that you face in Bristol are nothing like the challenges that those rural people are facing in Penzance. So if I was you, what I would be trying to understand is, if you're going to be a contractor for us, do you understand those complexities? That I think is...
Yeah, and I think that marries with what people have already been talking about, asking around just service delivery of the basic product and service is for those challenges in itself. But I think that, like you say, that extends out to the social aspects of the communities.
The other element, which I think with your geographical spread that needs to be considered, is the impact that you're having on the environment. Because I think you've obviously got the recycled element from the windows, but also the amount of travel and where things like storage is, for example, the sort of just-in-time nature of the delivery. Those are all really key, because I think I know from doing a lot of work in the Southwest, the travel element, when we have more vans per head of per tradesperson in the Southwest than almost anywhere else in the whole country, because of the challenges of getting around and delivering that. I would like to see people like yourselves being quite responsible and saying, okay, we want to understand how you're going to calculate your carbon footprint across all areas, and what you're going to do over the time period of that to reduce that. Because again, I think that rather than seeing these as separate elements, to me, the sustainability element has to be taken into account along with the training side of things and the development of people. Because again, sustainability, it covers things like training and development of people. It covers that long-term approach and long-term plan. So I would really like to see you guys putting a lot more pressure on me and saying to me, right, I want to know what you're going to do over the, let's say it's a five-year cycle that you're working on. So what you're going to do over the 5-year period to reduce the amount of travel that you're going to be delivering. And by reducing the amount of travel, what I have to do is make sure that I employ and train local people, because that's how I would be training it. So that's why, again, it becomes completely linked. So where people maybe seen a sustainability question, a training question, and a recruitment question, and a self-delivery question as being completely separate questions in a technical subject.
Which is also a value for money question as well.
It's a value for money question as well. So they all come together, and that's why I get frustrated at some of the questions people are asking when people are saying things like, we don't think social value questions should be scored. I say, what's wrong with you? You know, why are you working in this sector if you don't think social value questions should be scored? Because to me, it's fundamental. The reason we work in social housing is because we care. We want to do things a little bit better, and we want to make a difference through the work that we do when we get up on a Monday morning.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's
I hope that
really
helps.
helpful. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
This episode of the Social Housing Roundtable is sponsored by Alertical. Alertical helps as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. Alertical's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Calls, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alertical works with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and landlords. In 2022, Alertical won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023 won Housing Supplier of the Year. I'm delighted to have them as our sponsor of the Social Housing Roundtable throughout 2024. Thank you, Shonak. If anyone else would like to come in at any point, just as Shonak did, please do use the raise hand function. We'd love to hear from you. And I know a few points have been made in the chat that I'll go to now, but just want to make people aware that, you know, everyone is welcome to share thoughts, ideas, and agree or disagree. That's the whole point in the roundtable and what we're discussing today. So, a question which comes through from Morris: do you think people have lost the meaning of social value and not going to platforms such as Hacked to really understand? And I guess that ties in a little bit with a follow-up question that's been raised both himself and Judith, which was for those who involve tenants around procurement and evaluations. And Judith has said, as residents involved in procurement, we've asked for training in as many aspects of the process. We are asking to be involved from beginning to interview, and now being involved in ongoing monitoring of contracts that's slowly happening when residents have time. And the reason I bring that back and tie that into the question we had, which is, do we think we lost the value and lost the meaning of social value? I wonder whether or not, and maybe this is a little bit controversial, a lot of landlords, and I don't know if your opinion ties into this at all, Craig, really understand what social value can deliver and what it could be and what it can do in terms of that wider space. Because if we're trying to run internal training for residents or internal training for staff in general, but we don't truly understand actually the breadth of social value and what it can deliver more poignantly, then how can we possibly upskill people when we don't have the skills ourselves? And yet people like yourself, contractors, going, well, actually, there's a huge breadth of things we can deliver, but we're waiting for you to kind of guide us on which bit you want, but the landlords know the breadth that can be covered, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's really hard to talk for other people, because I can only really talk for us, and we do our best to try to sort of steer our customers to where we think they maybe should be, because we get quite a variance. We work for about 600 different social landlords across the country, and I think there's a massive variance from people who have a very clear understanding of what they're looking for, and people who maybe somewhere in the middle who have a really good heart and want to do the right thing but don't fully understand what they want, and then you get people over here that don't really get it, and they're just maybe doing it because they think it ticks a box. I think that's probably the same for contractors. Actually, I think you probably get it on both sides. And I did actually interview a director level chap, I won't say who it's from, but from a tier 1 contractor probably about a year and a half ago, and he said to me that the first item on their board agenda every single month was their risk register. And the first point on their risk register was, if their customers were to hold them to account over social value, what impact that would have on the business, because they genuinely believed it would have sunk the company, because their approach to social value was do as little as you possibly can, as little as you can get away with, and only really do something when the customer really pushes for it. And it'd be a very well-known name. You would all know the name that I'm talking about. But that attitude doesn't help anybody. Firstly, it gives contractors a bad name, and I get frustrated with that because we don't behave that way. And secondly, I think it makes landlords look at it and think, well, where do we go from here? Because if I'm constantly pushing and I'm getting nothing back, and I think eventually people start using things like hacked calculator and things like that, which I don't love monetizing social value. I don't think it's necessarily the best way of dealing with it. But I think sometimes with some of these maybe poorer quality contractors or contractors that care about social value less, it's the only way really of holding them to account. So I don't necessarily agree with it, but I see it's got a place, is probably the best way of putting that one.
Thank you very much. Maurice, your thoughts?
I was just going to say, as much as it is I believe there is a collaborative approach that needs to be done. In my experience, I have come across some HAs where they've had that social value element in a tender, and it's just resulted in them wanting a monetary donation going towards something, which I've had mixed views on him before. I've thought either no one has had the time to actually really think of this procurement, because a lot of us may know, some of you may know, when it comes to procurement, sometimes they are last minute, they are knee-jerk reactions, they're not that strategically thought out, and so therefore sometimes the tender is just quickly thrown out, questions aren't really evaluated, things aren't really looked at. And I remember questioning the person at the time. I was like, why are you doing a monetary donation? Surely there's something else that you could do here, right? Because then how are you then just going to track that? Are you just, is it the organization's objective for their social value where they haven't had the time and resource to actually sit and think strategically? Do they think it's just best to, let's get a picture moment with a check and we've ticked a box here? But then where does that go? What does that do with that? Say if they do a donation to a community center, how do we know 6 months, 12 months down the line that community center shuts down due to lack of funding or anything like that? Where is the lasting impact and effect that can be had there? I also think that there are some organizations where they have lost sight of social value, and pretty much like we would have experienced in the procurement, hence why the new act is in, people have got complacent with procurement. They just churn things out. They throw out this, they want a contract has been let, let's just throw out the exact same terms and specification and the questions that we had last time for this new procurement, when the economy has changed, landscapes have changed, tenants' expectations have changed, specifications on products have changed, pricing has definitely changed. We saw a lot of that when lockdown happened. So I feel that there's definitely an area, and I hope, I've got faith under the new act that a lot of organizations are actually going to take some time, and that procurement professionals, I'm one of those advocates. I'm always adding value to my stakeholders who aren't in procurement to let them know what is the regs, what you can and can't do under procurement, what the risks are going to be if you decide to go against the rules and the regs or against any sort of compliance. And it's a great time to refresh everybody's mind and get a whole new mentality around procurement. And I think it's a great, social value has been heavily linked with the Procurement Act. I think it's a great time for more talks like this at events like CIH Brighton or any like industry sector events where social value can kind of get that refreshed and people can be rejigged in new practices and ways to think about it. I've been really encouraged by what you've said this morning, Craig, already on this call and seeing people's comments, and it just makes me feel everyone's going to get roped up in the Procurement Act, but let's not forget about the social value element of it. Let's not let that be another thing that goes to the wayside and people just start knee-jerk reacting. There needs to be more discussions on it and good practices. If you've got any good experiences or good practices, Craig, in terms of how you see social value being implemented in different ranges of procurements, I'd love to engage with you and get more information just to maybe share internally, or just to maybe even talk about a different event so people can say, look, when you're doing certain procurements and you're thinking social value, think of it from this angle, or think of the lasting impact of that particular procurement for your residents or the stakeholders, etc.
Well, more than happy, Maurice, on that one, and this applies to anyone on the call. If you want to contact me outside of this and have a call and have any discussion, just an off-the-record chat, I'm more than happy to do that. I have to be honest, I'm a great believer in trying to do some good with the work that we do. I'm very fortunate. I'm the owner of a significant business, and I've said to people on a regular basis, when I wake up on a Monday morning, do I want to try and drive another percentage point or try and make more money, or do I actually want to make a difference? And I look at it and I think, by the time I get to the end of my career, if I retire or keel over or whatever, do I want to actually sit there and think to myself, I made all this money and I did, all this, or do I actually want to think, I had helped X amount of people get onto the career ladder and I made a difference to X amount of people's lives, or, even the big one, sustainability at the moment. We self-delivered about 2,500 retrofit program, 2,500 properties in terms of decarbonisation last year. We did about another 2,500 through subcontractors. I'm so proud of that, because I look at it and I think, see those 2,500 we delivered, they're nearly all tradespeople that work in our business that we have trained to deliver those new measures. Those are the things that make me really proud. And what I would like you guys to try to do is find me's, find the people like me in the industry that actually want and I don't just mean our business, because I'm not the only business that operates with a social conscience, but find businesses that actually care, that want to do the job properly, that want to do it for the right reasons, that want to drive positive change and really make make a difference as part of delivering the contracts. And there are always challenges because of price point, because you guys will push us to a low price point just because of the nature of the world we're working in. But that doesn't mean that these things have to be bolt on. It doesn't mean that they have to sit on the side. They can still be integral to project delivery. And if you guys any of you wanted to have a call with me, I'm more than happily introduce you to our head of social value as well. Kirsty's absolutely brilliant, and she's one of those people that what she always comes up with is really great social value plans that don't cost a lot of money. So she'll always look at it and say, well, like I said before, if you can get the community involved in refurbishing a community centre rather than sending 5 or 6 tradesmen to do it, well, that's obviously cheaper, but it has more of an impact on the community. So you can spend less money and have a greater output. It's just about sitting down and thinking about it in a really clever way, rather than just throwing money at it or monetizing it through the hack value and all those kind of things. Although I do have to say I'm not overly criticising those, because I do understand why they're used as tools.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, because I think this is where the values aligned and so much of our conversation came about, because the reason this is free is because of the recruitment work I do, but this has grown to something more than I thought it would be. We've got 2,500 members across the last 4 years, and yet it stays free and accessible for everybody, because, as you say, I want to be able to go, well, this is what makes the difference. Yes, the recruitment arm is important, and what I do there, I try and do very ethically, but it's what more can we do as businesses when you are, we get paid through tenants' money. So what we as providers are doing with that money to actually try and make a difference back? And it was interesting when we looked at the title for today, and we looked at kind of long-term impact, and we looked at long-term partners, and we talked about kind of what you can do over periods of time rather than in the short term. And in a world at the moment where certainly in the UK, Europe and beyond, but heavily in the UK, we are so short on trade staff. We are so short, we are facing a national shortage of people with green skills. We are facing a huge trouble, with the amount of people who are going to be retiring and don't have the skills that, you've mentioned there about the upskilling of green skills and everything that's coming through. In 5-10 years, they're going to be more than invaluable. We're going to be relying on those people training the next workforce coming through because we don't have the workforce that we need at all in those spaces. But Craig, do you see, and I appreciate this is a slight pivot, but is there still a stigma attached to those who work in trade, do you feel? Do you still feel that it's one of those situations where there's true social value to people for their careers, their lives? You've talked about supporting people who are obviously facing homelessness and the work you're doing there, but also generally just giving people a career that people never saw before. And yet there is still a stigma attached, in my opinion anyway, that was certainly there when I went through school and everything else, attached to people who were operatives. And learning a skill and learning a trade, going, well, you're only doing that if you're not clever enough to go to university, was always the kind of mindset. And yet now, I remember someone very close to me was leaving their career in the forces, and I said, go and learn a trade. Because I tell you what, in 5-10 years, you'll be able to charge what you want. If money is important, A, you can charge what you want, but B, you are going to be so in demand and you will have more work than you could ever need. And that part of society, I think we're almost undervaluing in terms of what you're doing as a long-term partner for social value there, because what you're doing through the college and the school is fixing a problem that I still don't think Britain is very awake to how large the problem is generally. And there are people who are, but I think generally society isn't.
Well, I think firstly, the first part of your question, yes, there is still a stigma attached to it. I think that will start to disappear. The reason I think it will start to disappear is, interestingly, Goldman Sachs about 2 years ago released a document on AI and the impact that AI was going to have on different sectors, different industries and employment. And as part of that document, they actually stated, I was delighted about this, but they actually stated that the career that was most likely to be unaffected by AI was building maintenance. So I kind of looked at it like, yay, we'll be fine. But I guess because of the nature of needing to assess a situation and then kind of small repairs and dealing with residents and interaction with people and things like that, it makes it very difficult for robotics or any kind of systemization of that. So that was terrific. But we have really started looking at how can we, the zero to hero scheme. A lot of the reason we've implemented that is because what we're looking at is, can we retrain people as AI starts to take jobs in different sectors? So can we look at maybe certain call center positions? There's the company, I think it's Klarna, they're called, that do, when you go online and it gives you a buying option, just from something, and you can almost buy it in credit. They had something like 1,000 people that sat in an office all day, every day, and all they did was send out statements to people on a monthly basis and chase up cash. Well, they made that entire call center redundant because they've now used chatbots and AI robots to deliver all of that. And I immediately look on that as an opportunity. So I'm looking at that and saying, well, there's 1,000 people. So you quite rightly said, Matt, there is a shortage of people in our industry. How can I engage with that 1,000 people? What can I do to retrain those 1,000 people into different roles within our business, within my business? So I'm looking at it and saying, yes, I still think there is a stigma. It can be challenging, I think, particularly because of social media, and people see these kind of fake lives, if you like, online. And, you've got 16-year-olds looking and thinking, I don't want to get paid £15 an hour to go out in the cold and wet November morning. I want to, drive a sports car and pop bottles of champagne with those people that I see on social media. So there is this kind of perception of a life that doesn't really exist. That's a big obstacle for us to come across. But if we can continue to drip feed our business and our industry with trainees from school leaver age, but over and above that can start to figure out ways of re-engaging workforce maybe that doesn't exist anymore. Obviously, in things like San Francisco, they now have self-driving taxis. Well, I'm not saying that's going to happen overnight, but over the next 10 years, that's going to creep in here. So what happens to all those taxi drivers? Well, I know a bunch of those taxi drivers probably started off life as tradesmen anyway. So if we can re-engage them and start getting them back into our industry and start developing them into doing things, just, softly and just gently, then we can meet the demand that's there. It's just about thinking about it a little bit differently.
And I think that's where it goes back almost, I guess, to Maurice's point very early on, which is around that communication piece. Who is actually around the table making these decisions? Who is involved in the discussion in the first place? And what knowledge is there and what knowledge is absent? What don't people know? And I think it's, I sat in that AMIP conference, and as you say, there's a really wide breadth of views and thoughts and everything else. But what also came through was actually just how broad social value in and of itself can be, and what can be classified as social value under the Social Value Act and everything else that's come through, the Public Services Social Value Act. But I think what showcased to me during that is actually some of this isn't really adding that much value, and some of it is, and yet the costs can sometimes be quite similar. But that scrutiny we give businesses on their social value isn't enough. And also we just have a kind of expectation that if someone comes to us and says, hey, look, we're going to deliver X amount of money on social value, and this is what we're going to do, that it will just be done. And I know something else that came up on that day was the accountability piece, wasn't it? In terms of the partners we're partnered with, how accountable are they actually to that social value promise? And I guess that comes back to the pricing point you made earlier. Who's actually making sure that that social value is delivered at the end, and what are the repercussions if it isn't?
Yeah, and actually, I didn't, when I answered Maurice's question before, I did miss part of his question, which you've sort of fed into a little bit there, Matt. But in terms of the way to, I think, get the best out of contractors and make sure that they can be held to account over social value, I think it's really, really important that local authorities and social landlords, they set out those objectives in the first place. Because if you sit down and in a tender, if you say these are our 3 key objectives or our 5 key objectives, whatever those are, because I think they'll be very different. If talking to Sean before about Live West, the difference in Penzance and Bristol are they're not the same. They're completely different. So if you sit down and say these are our core objectives, okay, we've maybe got 10 contractors that are going to send you back a technical bid. So you're saying to those 10 contractors, these are our objectives. How are you going to meet those? You can actually compare like for like quite easily. It doesn't need to be monetized. You can, because as it stands at the moment, if you say, what are you going to do for us in the social value space? That's so wide. And that's your point, Matt, is somebody's perception of good and another person's perception of good can be completely different. But rather than talking about social value, if we actually drive it down to what are the objectives of this organization and what are the objectives of this contract is the other thing, because I think that's also really important. And if we can get that down to 5 or 6 key elements, it'd be very, very easy for procurement teams to be able to compare like for like.
I think that's it, isn't it? It's being able to know what to ask. I mean, Stella had just put in the chat there that it's about changing culture, isn't it? Changing education provision to provide trades training on an even playing field and allowing companies the space to provide the training. But then I think it's also further than that in terms of culture around procurement and what goes on in that space and who's involved in that process. Exactly as you've just said, if you can compare like for like, and you have the knowledge and understanding of what like for like truly means, and then you have a team there to hold people accountable. I was reading an article before we jumped on today. It was on Inside Housing. Francesca Lee, social value architect, does some work in that kind of space. And she said that, where was it? I've just put it up. If social housing providers don't step up, the entire premise of social value in procurement is at risk. And it's interesting to kind of look at where the onus for social value really lies, because I think housing providers obviously expect it as part of the contract and require it as part of the contract for contractors, but there are contractors who know they can put as much as they want in it, but they're never going to be held to account on it. So therefore, does it really matter what they put in, or are things just being put in a contract to win it rather than actually what's deliverable? And that's the bit that drives me a little bit crazy when I see things that come through and going, there's no way you're going to deliver this, but you've done it to win the contract. So how ethically are we, I guess, managing that process from our procurement partners, and what are the what is that accountability for those partners who do let us down?
Yeah, I think it's everybody's responsibility. But I think if based on what you're saying there, Matt, I think the big thing to take away from that, the big thing that people get wrong, is social value should not sit outside. It shouldn't be a separate thing. So it's, yes, it might be a technical question that gets a price, that gets a score put against it, but it needs to be integral to the delivery. So, for example, if I was to say to a contractor, you're going to fit X amount of windows over the course of next year, what's your resourcing plan to do that? And the contractor turned around to me and said, I need 12 tradespeople to deliver that contract. Well, my immediate response would be, where are your apprentices? Where are the trainees? Who are you teaching? Because if they're telling you they need 12 people, they're not even thinking about trainees. They're not even thinking about apprentices. So there's almost some little telltale signs by asking certain questions to get a feel for, this organisation, do they really care about social value, or is it sits over there and we've got somebody that sits in that office over there and they'll kind of do their best to try and make it look like we're creating something or we're building something, when actually all they're really doing is trying to give it face time rather than actually being integral to the project delivery.
And I think that's where, unfortunately, a lot of the challenges come in, that housing doesn't have the data that it needs in order to be effective in this space either, does it? I imagine that must be one of the biggest frustrations when you're working with people going, as you mentioned earlier, tell us what you need, but they don't know what they need or what's going on there, because housing is still very much behind the curve in terms of knowing who's in its home, who lives in their homes, and what the skills are available to those people.
I genuinely believe you can't criticise a contractor for getting it wrong if the landlord themselves haven't given them that information to start off with. If they haven't started off by saying, this is what the demographic of our residents are and this is what we want to achieve, you can't then say, why is the contractor not delivering meaningful social value? So not that, okay, we'll try and do it anyway. But a lot of other contractors say, well, what is it you want me to do? Because, if you don't know what you want me to do, what's my chance of understanding what I want me to do? So it's social value shouldn't just be banded as social value that sits over there. It needs to be seen as, right, these are core objectives. If I asked Live West what their core objectives of delivering the window replacement programme, they would talk about protecting the houses, they would talk about their cyclical programme, they would talk about what they want for the residents and resident communication. They also need to include in those objectives an understanding of, and what we also want to make sure is that as part of that we completely train start to finish over the duration of the project 10 new tradespeople who live in our houses, or something to that effect, because that immediately, if that's all they did as social value as part of that contract, it's probably better than 90% of the contracts that are being delivered around the country. But just by putting that one line in the tender, they could actually achieve a huge amount from a social value point of view.
And like I say, and that's something that's very easy to hold someone to account on.
Yeah.
I put in the chat there, and it was very different, tangent for it. He said he had an uncle who was a chief petty officer, electrical engineer, who sold insurance as no one would employ him as he didn't have the paperwork. He had 25 years experience repairing some of the most complicated electrical circuits on missiles and ships. Sonar and radar is not a unique thing. And it's that kind of thing as well that's wild in terms of qualifications for staff and everything that goes on in those spaces. But that's a whole nother debate in terms of what we need to look at. We are down to about a minute to go, Craig. Are there any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with today?
I'd just like to thank you for letting me come on and have the conversation with you. I'm a great believer that the more we can share these messages, the more it can impact everyone, and the better we can do. I don't really believe in squirreling away in a corner and trying to do some good just ourselves. I think it takes all of us, and where there's a responsibility for social value set, it sits as a combination between the landlords, it sits with us, and it sits with all other stakeholders as well, because actually fundamentally, if we don't get engagement from residents and people that live in the property, it becomes very, very difficult. I can put adverts out all day long saying we've got apprenticeships. If nobody applies for them, then we're in trouble, right? So it takes all stakeholders.
It certainly does. Thank you, Craig, for coming on today. I think it's been really, really interesting. And by looks of it in the chat, everyone's agreeing. The best of luck to Bell Group through 2025. I think what you're doing is genuinely different, and I think anyone doing something different is absolutely vital at the moment. So the best of luck to you with all of it, and a huge thanks for coming on today. To those who are with us and part of the Social Housing Roundtable community, next week we are discussing housing officer burnout. So that'll be a nice, easy, non-contentious topic. Obviously not. But for now, Craig, someone just said, what's the best way to get in touch with yourselves moving forward?
what I'll do is I will put my email and my phone number in the chat. But also, if you want to share that, Matt, more than happy for you to do that as well.
Thank you, Craig. Big thanks to everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you next week. But for now, thanks again to Bell Group, and I'll speak to you soon. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.